Let's start off with the whole Stewart-Haas thing, Chris. We've been talking about this for pretty much all of this season. Suspected something may be happening, that Stewart-Haas may be selling off a couple of the teams. Instead, they've announced this week they will be shutting down the entire operation.
Correct.
That means 4 charters up for grabs, assuming there will be charters next year, because that still hasn't been decided yet.
Yes, that's the big question. There's nothing to sell of the 4 Cup teams until we have a new charter agreement in place, and we don't have a new charter agreement in place. But as we know right now, Stewart-Haas's Cup Series program will be no more starting in 2025, and I think that came to a shock to some people. I think people expected 2, maybe 3 of the teams to shut down, but now this week it was announced that Stewart-Haas Racing will cease operations completely of the Cup Series entity at the end of the season in Phoenix, and that will essentially end a reign of a championship organization that's been around the sport a long time. What happens with the Xfinity Series program remains to be seen. I suspect that we'll see that branch off into something different and still carry possibly a new name or have some affiliation with Gene Haas.
That's one of the things that's been tough, I think, for the drivers and the crews, Shane, because there's been so much conversation about this. And I know Chase Briscoe makes a weekly appearance on Sirius, and he gets asked about it all the time. And it's been tough for these guys to talk about it because they have known nothing.
You could tell that all this has really been happening really quickly. I mean, just most recently, Chase Briscoe, I think, said that he really wasn't sure about the future. And just today, even, it seemed like there was going to be a decision made that Tony Stewart might talk to these drivers about the future. And it all just kind of came together that the team is actually going as far as to close all of its operations. And I think it's important to note this isn't just some small team. And a lot of times those small teams that have 1 or 2 charters aren't just going to seize their operations just like that. This is a team that has won 2 Cup championships, has won 69 races, in a lot of ways has been the top Ford team in the sport. Just all of a sudden, Kevin Harvick retires. None of those 4 guys might really take that. A lot of trouble within there, and already announcing it is closing after 2024.
It's pretty amazing, and already we know, Chris, that there are people lining up to get the charters because the charters are the key. 36 of these things guaranteed starting spots in the fields of the Cup Series. And who are the players that, I think we all suspect that there are 2 or 3 of them that we pretty much suspect will be leading in front of the food line, so to speak.
Well, once the new charter agreement is in place, I'm sure they'll be lining up at Stewart-Haas's door before the ink is dry on those charter agreements. But I think the leading candidates, obviously, we suspect Trackhouse is interested in one. 2311 is interested. We've also heard RFK, but Brad says that he needs $30 million in order to get into the fray. Front Row Motorsports is another top running candidate. And I suspect the odd man out at Stewart-Haas Racing for 2025, at least at this time, will be Ryan Preece. I'm not sure what his plans are. I'm hearing buzz that Chase Briscoe, Josh Berry, and who am I forgetting? Josh Berry and Noah Gragson will all have new rides, and I'm hearing also Cole Custer will be back in Cup in 2025. So I'm hearing that 3 of the 4 charters have been already accounted for, and that 4th charter, from what I understand, will remain within ties to the Stewart-Haas organization in 2025. So a lot to be unrolled over the next couple of months, but a lot more decisions to be made. And this goes beyond Stewart-Haas Racing as an organization. Now you have 300 employees who are either going to be looking for new opportunities in NASCAR or outside, or perhaps even outside of the sport.
I think Chris brings up a great point, Shane, is from the standpoint that teams aren't going away. Stewart-Haas is shutting the door, but the teams, as far as car count, will continue to exist. You're talking about a +1. You're talking about Trackhouse going from 2 to 3. You're talking about 2311 going from 2 to 3. You're talking about Front Row going from 2 to 3, and then whatever happens with the 4th charter. But there are a lot of people at the organization of Stewart-Haas that are going to be out of jobs, and I don't expect that these other teams, even though they're expanding, as far as car count goes, I wouldn't imagine they would expand accordingly to fill 300 spots.
Yeah, and also that Stewart-Haas, like I said, having 4 teams now, and a lot of these other bigger teams, Stewart-Haas alongside Hendrick Motorsports and JGR, and having that many cars, but at the same time, Hendrick Motorsports doesn't have 7 cars in the Cup Series and half of the playoff drivers. At the end of the day, even last year, Chase Elliott misses the playoffs, Alex Bowman isn't having a top year, and those are really only, now you're down to Kyle Larson and William Byron, who are top drivers in the series, or Hendrick drivers. That's just 2 out of the top drivers. So Stewart-Haas having potentially one of the top drivers, or then 4 cars and none of them are top drivers, it's a big difference. And so if we see Trackhouse or 2311, a team like that that's growing, that has multiple entries in the playoffs, potentially have 3 or not even 4, but just 3 cars, and all of them are potential playoff drivers, that could be really how the sport continues to move. As again, it's not like there are a lot of these teams that have a million entries. You have Hendrick that's as big and dominant as it is, and then other teams and a lot of opportunity now.
What happened, Chris? Ultimately, what happened? I mean, you go for an organization.
I think they were honest today. I think that in their statement that Gene Haas and Tony Stewart were honest, where their priorities have changed and have shifted. It's not the first time we've seen, well, I shouldn't say a big, it's a 4-car operation. So we've seen smaller teams and maybe some 2-car teams fold, but this is a 4-car operation. I just think that the longer that this team went on, the priority shifted. Tony's off exploring new adventures and doing new things. He wants to become a father, and so your priorities shift with age. I think Gene has other interests now. Now, do I think Gene Haas is going to be completely out of the NASCAR sport at the end of 2024 season? I'm not convinced. I still think he will be around in some capacity, but as far as Tony Stewart's concerned, I feel like he's been off the bandwagon for a little bit now. I don't think his concentration has been 100% focused on the Cup team, but I will say this. I know that often SHR is referred to as a powerhouse organization, but when was the last time that we could say that their on-track performance warranted them as a powerhouse team? I feel like it's been 3-4 years before they've earned that title and that opportunity. I feel like as a team that's been growing up, it's been like a Trackhouse or a Stewart-Haas, a Trackhouse or a even Front Row Motorsports, who has essentially passed those guys as far as delivering on performance.
They've been getting more attention lately for being rule violators than anything else, than success as far as victory lane, Shane.
They really have been. I mean, and again, to Chris's point, it's not like this is a team that has 4 cars and is a Hendrick Motorsports or a Joe Gibbs Racing in terms of its success on the track and the time that it's been a team. Team had only existed since 2009, and yes, it had success, won nearly 70 races, multiple championships, but A, has not won a championship in the last decade, and B, like you said, look at other teams like 2311, like Trackhouse, even Front Row, that have drivers who can get into the playoffs, who do have success in the playoffs. Even Stewart-Haas's best drivers outside of Harvick before, you had Chase Briscoe nearing a championship 4 appearance 2 years ago, and that's about the extent of it. A lot of times, currently, you have Chase Briscoe sitting at 16th in the Cup Series right now. Josh Berry, the rookie, is 19th, and those are the highest ones. And then Ryan Preece far down there, obviously, his big story at Daytona last year. That was probably the biggest time we've talked about him in a while. And just, there have 4 guys in the Cup Series, but just haven't been able to rise to that, what any team that has 4 cars could be.
A lot of people, Chris, have been pointing at Tony Stewart and say this is all on him. I mean, you talked about that his interests lie elsewhere, but and that hey, he's an absentee owner. Well, there are a lot of absentee owners in this sport. I mean, is he being unfairly criticized?
I think there's it takes 2 to tango, right? So I just think he may not have complete interest in his organization. I still think he has interest, right? He may not be at the shop, but he's still in the know of what's going on there, and he hasn't hid behind the fact that the team hasn't performed up to snuff the last couple of years. So I think, it's easy to point the finger at him, right? Because he's not around and he may not be at the track as often and he's off racing, in the NHRA series. So I don't think it's fair to completely point the blame at him. The priorities have shifted, and let's face it, they've lost a lot of multi-million dollars worth of sponsorship. And how much do you expect Gene Haas to continue to dive into his pockets to keep SHR on the racetrack?
Shane, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, everything that I've been seeing, like you said, Tony Stewart involved with the NHRA stuff, very involved in racing in general. But that doesn't mean that he necessarily has no or extreme involvement with his NASCAR team. Every team seems to really run differently. And that doesn't mean that there's this blueprint that Hendrick Motorsports, Mr. H does it this way, and they win championships, and that works. You have 2311 Racing, where you have a current driver who drives for a different team, and Denny Hamlin leads the Cup Series right now, owning that team alongside arguably the greatest athlete of all time. Michael Jordan isn't in airspeed every single day. Denny Hamlin isn't working with Bubba and Tyler every single day. But because of Michael Jordan being involved in the sport the way that he is, and Denny Hamlin, a current driver, having the role that he has, 2311 has developed in an innovative way, and Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick both reached the playoffs last year. So I think there's not I use the term blueprint. There's not a way that a team has to be run. And so even if Tony Stewart wasn't necessarily as involved as, say, I don't know, Coach or Mr. H or somebody, it doesn't mean that he had no involvement or that, oh, he's a drag racer, so he's so involved with his NASCAR team and it just didn't work out. I think that at the end of the day, this team has existed for 15 years. It had a lot of success, and at a certain point, probably no fault of their own, it wasn't going to work out.